Right now, as you listen to these words, your brain is doing something extraordinary. It's not just processing information. It's weaving a narrative, a continuous story about what's happening, why it matters, and what it all means. You can't turn it off. Even when you try to be silent, to simply observe, the storyteller continues. I'm listening now. This is interesting. Or is it? What time is it? Your brain is a meaning-making machine, and meaning comes wrapped in stories. From the moment you wake until you drift into dreams, your consciousness narrates. It explains, connects. It creates plots from random events and characters from everyone you meet. Your entire sense of reality is filtered through this narrative lens. But here's what's remarkable. This isn't a bug in human consciousness. It's the feature that made us survive, create civilization, and understand ourselves. Your brain tells stories because without them, the world would be incomprehensible chaos. In this deep exploration, we'll journey into the neuroscience of narrative. We'll discover why your brain can't help but create stories, how memory is reconstructed narrative, why dreams feel like midnight theater, and how the stories you tell yourself literally reshape your brain and your life. Perfect for late-night listening, background study, or simply letting your mind wander through fascinating ideas. So settle into this moment. Get comfortable, and let's explore why your brain is, above all else, a storyteller. Part 1. The brain is not a recorder. Let's begin with something that might unsettle you. Your brain does not record reality like a camera. It doesn't capture objective truth and file it away for later review. Instead, your brain interprets, selects, fills gaps, constructs. When light hits your retina, when sound waves enter your ears, your brain receives raw data. But that data is incomplete, ambiguous, overwhelming. So your brain does what it evolved to do. It creates a coherent story from fragments. This is not passive perception. It's active construction. Consider this. Right now, you have a blind spot in each eye where the optic nerve connects. No photoreceptors exist there, yet you don't perceive two black holes in your vision. Your brain fills in the gap seamlessly, inventing visual information that matches the surrounding context. You're seeing things that aren't there, and you don't even notice. This happens constantly with all your senses. Your brain is predicting what should be there, comparing it to incoming data, and constructing an experience that feels smooth and continuous. Reality as you experience it is your brain's best guess, its most useful story. Why does it work this way? Because your brain didn't evolve to perceive truth. It evolved to survive. And survival requires making quick decisions with incomplete information. When your ancestor heard rustling in the grass, the brain that created a story that might be a predator survived. The brain that waited for complete data got eaten. Story beat accuracy. Narrative beat truth. So your brain became a storytelling machine. Connects dots. Finds patterns. It asks why and generates answers even when there are none. When two events happen close together in time, your brain assumes causation. When you see shapes in clouds or faces in toast, your brain is creating narrative meaning from randomness. When you experience coincidence, your brain whispers, "This means something," because a false story is safer than no story at all. Chaos is threatening. Pattern is predictable. Narrative is survival. This is why conspiracy theories feel so compelling. Why humans have always created myths to explain thunder, disease, and death. Why children ask why incessantly and need stories to fall asleep. Your brain is wired to reject randomness, to resist the idea that sometimes things just happen. It needs cause and effect, beginning and end, meaning and resolution. It needs story. And here's the deepest truth. You are a story your brain tells itself. Your sense of being a continuous self, a unified person moving through time, that's narrative. Without the storytelling function, there would be no you, just disconnected moments of sensation and thought. You are the story. The brain is the storyteller, and reality is the raw material. Part 2. The meaning-making machine. Neuroscientists have a term for what your brain does constantly: pattern completion. It takes partial information and completes the pattern. It fills in missing pieces, creates holes from fragments. This happens automatically below conscious awareness. Your brain is always asking, what's the pattern here? What does this mean? How does this fit into a larger story? Look at the night sky. You see constellations, bears, hunters, scorpions. But stars are just distant suns scattered randomly through space. The patterns aren't out there. They're stories we project onto randomness. Every culture throughout history has done this. Same stars, different stories. Because the human brain cannot tolerate random dots. It must connect them. It must create meaning. The same mechanism operates everywhere. You see a face in an electrical outlet, a dog in a cloud. Your brain's pattern recognition system is so powerful, so hungry for meaning, that it finds faces even in abstract shapes. This is called pareidolia, and it's not a mistake. It's your survival software running perfectly. Better to see 100 false faces than to miss the one real threat hiding in shadow. Your brain also completes patterns in time. When events happen in sequence, even randomly, your brain creates causal stories. The gambler who wins after touching his lucky coin believes the coin caused the win. The athlete who performs well wearing certain socks believes the socks have power. Superstitions are stories the brain creates to explain random outcomes. And once the story is established, confirmation bias reinforces it. You notice when the pattern fits. You forget when it doesn't. The story becomes stronger, more real, more obviously true. This is why eyewitness testimony is so unreliable. Your brain doesn't record what happened. It constructs a story of what happened, filling gaps with what makes sense, what fits the narrative, what you expect to remember. Two people witness the same event and remember completely different stories. Not because one is lying, but because each brain created a different narrative from the same incomplete data. Silence itself becomes uncomfortable. White noise feels random and threatening. But add the slightest pattern, a rhythm, a melody, a voice, and the nervous system relaxes. The brain has found meaning. It has created story. This is why music moves us so deeply. It's organized sound, pure pattern, narrative without words. Your brain follows the melody, predicts the next note, feels satisfaction when prediction succeeds and pleasure when it's surprised in just the right way. Even abstract art, even instrumental music, even wordless dance, all feel like they're about something. Your brain creates meaning, projects narrative. It asks, what is this expressing? What does it mean? The answer is always, whatever story your brain creates. Because your brain prefers a false story over no story, meaning over chaos, narrative over void. Uncertainty activates the amygdala, your brain's threat detection center. The unknown feels dangerous. But the moment you have a story, even a wrong one, anxiety decreases. The story gives you something to grasp, predict, prepare for. This is why people would rather have bad news than no news. Why waiting without information feels worse than receiving a negative diagnosis. The story, even a painful one, is better than the void. Your brain didn't evolve for truth. It evolved for meaning. And meaning is story. Part 3, the default mode network. Deep within your brain, there's a network of regions that scientists call the default mode network, or DMN. For decades, neuroscientists thought this network was just resting activity, the brain idling between tasks. They were completely wrong. The default mode network is where stories live. It's your brain's narrative engine, and it's one of the most active, most energy-consuming systems in your entire nervous system. The DMN activates when you're not focused on the external world, when you daydream, when you reminisce, when you imagine future scenarios, when you think about yourself or try to understand others, when you mind wander during a boring meeting or a long drive. All of these are storytelling activities. The network includes the medial prefrontal cortex, which helps construct your sense of self, the posterior cingulate cortex, which integrates memory and imagination, the temporal parietal junction, which helps you imagine other people's mental states, the hippocampus, your brain's memory center. Together, these regions create the narrative of you. When you're doing nothing, lying in bed, staring out a window, taking a shower, your DMN is busy. It's not resting. It's constructing stories, replaying conversations, imagining future scenarios, creating internal dialogue. This is your inner narrator, the voice that never stops talking. Scientists estimate that we spend nearly half our waking hours in mind-wandering, with our DMN active. Half your life is spent in stories about the past, the future, the hypothetical, the imagined. The DMN is also active during social cognition. When you try to understand what someone else is thinking or feeling, your DMN activates. You're creating a story about their mental state, imagining their perspective, simulating their experience in your own mind. Empathy is narrative. Understanding others is storytelling. You've never been inside another person's consciousness, but you create stories about what it must be like. The DMN is also where your sense of continuous self emerges. The feeling that you're the same person who existed yesterday and will exist tomorrow. That despite constant change, there's a you that persists through time. This continuity is narrative. Your brain strings together memories, sensations, and projections into a coherent storyline with you as the protagonist. Without this narrative function, you would be just a series of disconnected moments, no unified self, no identity. The storyteller creates your entire sense of time, self, and meaning. And when you finally fall asleep, when conscious awareness fades, the storyteller doesn't stop. It just loses its editor. And dreams begin. Part 4: Memory is a story, not a file. Here's an uncomfortable truth. Your memories are not accurate recordings of what happened. They're reconstructed narratives, edited each time you access them. Every memory you have is a story you're telling yourself right now. When something happens, your brain encodes certain elements: sensory details, emotional tone, context, meaning. But the encoding is selective and incomplete. Your brain captures fragments, not complete records. Then, when you remember, your brain reconstructs the event from those fragments. It fills gaps with plausible details. It adds elements that fit the narrative. It colors the memory with your current emotions and beliefs. And here's the crucial part. Each time you remember, you're not accessing the original event. You're accessing the last time you remembered it. Each recall is a reconstruction, and each reconstruction changes the memory slightly. It's like a story passed orally through generations. Each retelling shifts details, emphasizes different elements, adapts to the audience. Your memories work the same way. Psychologist Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated this powerfully. She showed that false memories can be implanted through suggestion and repeated imagining. People could be convinced they'd experienced childhood events that never happened. Being lost in a mall, meeting Bugs Bunny at Disneyland. The memories felt completely real, vivid, detailed, emotional, but they were stories constructed through suggestion and imagination. This isn't rare. It's how memory works. Your brain doesn't distinguish between remembered events and imagined ones with perfect clarity. Both are reconstructed narratives using similar neural machinery. Your childhood memories? Many of them are probably reconstructions based on photographs you've seen, stories your family told, or events you imagined so many times they became real. The memories that feel most vivid, most certain, those might be the most reconstructed, the most edited through repeated recall. Your brain keeps the memories that fit your self-narrative, the ones that support the story of who you think you are. Memories that contradict your self-concept get downplayed, reinterpreted, or forgotten entirely. This is why people often remember their past selves as less mature, less aware, less competent. The story needs growth. The narrative requires development. So your brain edits memories to create that arc. You also remember emotionally charged events more vividly, but not more accurately. High emotion increases the feeling of memory strength, but it also increases distortion. Your brain prioritizes meaning over accuracy. It remembers the emotional truth, the narrative significance, the story of what the event meant. The precise details matter less than the meaning. This is adaptive. Life would be overwhelming if you remembered everything with perfect accuracy. Your brain needs to compress, summarize, extract meaning. Stories are compression algorithms. They capture the essence while discarding the noise. But this means your entire autobiography is a story. The narrative of your life, who you've been, what shaped you, why you are the way you are, is a construction. A meaningful one, a useful one, but a construction nonetheless. Your past is a story you tell yourself about who you were. Your present is a story about who you are. Your future is a story about who you'll become. And all three are being created right now by the storyteller in your brain. Part 5: Why Dreams Feel Like Stories. Every night, when you slip into REM sleep, something extraordinary happens. The logical, executive parts of your brain quiet down. The emotional and memory centers remain active. And the narrative engine runs wild. You begin to dream. Dreams are pure storytelling without an editor. They're what happens when the brain's narrative function operates without logic, without reality testing, without the constraints of waking consciousness. And the result is surreal cinema. Impossible scenarios feel normal. Dead relatives speak. You fly without questioning how. Time loops and locations shift seamlessly. The narrative follows dream logic, emotional logic, where anything that feels meaningful is true. Neuroscientists have discovered that during REM sleep, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for critical thinking, shows decreased activity. Meanwhile, the limbic system, your emotional brain, remains highly active. The visual cortex fires intensely. The hippocampus processes memories. Your brain is combining memory fragments, emotional concerns, unfinished thoughts, and random neural firing into narrative. It's creating stories from chaos. But these aren't random stories. Research shows dreams often reflect emotional preoccupations, unresolved concerns, and significant relationships. The content might be bizarre, but the emotional themes are deeply personal. You dream about being chased because you're anxious about something pursuing you in waking life, a deadline, a confrontation, a responsibility. You dream about failing exams years after graduation because the emotional pattern of being tested and judged still resonates. Dreams are emotional storytelling. They process feelings through narrative. They work through concerns by creating symbolic scenarios. Modern neuroscience sees them as the brain processing emotions and consolidating memories through narrative. And like all stories, they use metaphor, symbol, and narrative structure. They have characters, conflicts, and resolutions, even if the resolution is waking up confused. The fact that dreams feel narrative, that they have plot progression and emotional arcs, reveals something fundamental about consciousness. Even when logic shuts down, even when you're not conscious in the usual sense, your brain is still creating story. You can't not narrate. The storyteller works in sleep as in waking. It's the fundamental operating system of consciousness. Dreams aren't prophetic messages, but they're not meaningless either. They're your brain processing experience through its native language, narrative. The bizarre symbols, the impossible scenarios, the emotional intensity, all of it reflects your brain trying to make sense of your life, your fears, your desires, your unfinished emotional business. And when you wake and try to remember the dream, you're immediately creating a new story. The memory of the dream is already an interpretation, a narrative reconstruction of narrative. Stories all the way down. Part 6: Stories calm the nervous system. There's a reason humans have told stories since the beginning of language. There's a reason every culture has myths, legends, and bedtime tales. There's a reason you feel compelled to rewatch familiar shows and reread favorite books. Stories calm the nervous system. When your brain understands the pattern, when it knows what's happening and what comes next, when events fit into a coherent narrative, your nervous system relaxes. Anxiety decreases. Cortisol lowers. You feel safe. This is why bedtime stories help children sleep. The narrative creates predictability. The familiar tale provides comfort. The structure soothes. Even if the story contains danger, dragons, witches, monsters, the narrative frame makes it safe. You know it's a story. You know how it will end. The uncertainty is contained within a predictable structure. Your nervous system craves predictability. In an unpredictable world, stories provide artificial certainty. They have beginnings, middles, and ends, causes and effects, meaning and resolution. Real life rarely offers such clarity. Events happen without obvious cause. Situations remain unresolved. Relationships end ambiguously. Meaning is elusive. But stories give you what reality doesn't: coherence, closure, meaning. This is why true crime is so popular. The world contains random violence, senseless tragedy. But true crime stories impose narrative. They explain motives. They reveal causes. They provide resolution through conviction or justice, or at least understanding. The story takes unbearable chaos and makes it comprehensible. Therapists understand this deeply. Much of therapy involves helping people rewrite their narratives. Trauma isn't just what happened. It's the story you tell about what happened. Depression isn't just sadness. It's a story about helplessness and hopelessness. Change the story, and you can change the experience. The stories you tell yourself about yourself matter. They create expectations. They shape behavior. They become self-fulfilling prophecies. If your story is "I always fail," you'll interpret neutral events as failures, miss evidence of success, and behave in ways that create more failure. The story creates the reality. But if you can rewrite the story, "I learn from setbacks, I'm developing resilience," the same events generate different meanings, emotions, behaviors, and outcomes. Stories also create social bonding. When you share stories with others, your brains synchronize. Research shows that during storytelling, the speaker's and listener's neural activity aligns in similar patterns. You're literally getting on the same wavelength, creating shared meaning, building connection through narrative. This is why humans gather to share stories. It's not just entertainment. It's neural synchronization. It's creating collective meaning. It's how we become we. Stories calm not just individual nervous systems, but collective ones. They create shared reality, common purpose, cultural identity. Part 7: Why Humans Needed Stories to Survive. Long before writing, before agriculture, before cities, humans told stories. Sitting around fires under star-filled skies, our ancestors narrated. They told stories about where food could be found and which plants were poisonous. About how to read animal tracks and predict weather. About the spirits in the forest and the gods in the sky. These weren't just entertainment. They were survival information compressed into memorable narrative. Facts are hard to remember. Data is abstract. But stories? Stories stick. Tell someone, "Don't eat the red berries with 5 leaves." They might forget. But tell them the story of the hunter who ate those berries and suffered terrible visions before dying. That story stays. Narrative is how pre-literate cultures transmitted knowledge across generations. The story was the technology. The plot was the instruction manual. The characters were cautionary examples or role models. Every culture developed myths that taught social norms. Stories about hospitality, about honor, about the consequences of greed or pride. These weren't just moral tales. They were the operating system of society. Your brain evolved in this environment. For hundreds of thousands of years, your ancestors survived by learning from stories. The ability to extract lessons from narrative, to imagine yourself in the story, to predict outcomes based on plot patterns, these were survival skills. The person who could hear a story about drought and imagine future drought, who could hear about conflict and predict future conflict, who could learn from others' mistakes without making them personally, that person survived. Natural selection favored the storytelling brain. The one that could create scenarios, imagine consequences, plan based on narrative patterns. This is why humans are unique among animals in our capacity for complex narrative. We survived because we could imagine, because we could simulate reality in story form, because we could test dangerous situations in the safety of narrative before encountering them in reality. The hunter who could imagine the hunt before it happened, visualizing the terrain, predicting the animal's behavior, hunted more successfully. The gatherer who could remember the story about seasonal plants, about which areas flooded when, gathered more efficiently. The tribe that could coordinate through shared stories about common enemies, shared ancestors, collective purpose, cooperated more effectively. Stories weren't decorative. They were functional. They were how we became human. And today, though our environment has changed radically, our brains haven't. We still think in narrative. We still learn through story. We still make sense of reality by creating plots with characters, conflicts, and resolutions. This is why case studies work better than statistics in teaching. Why anecdotes persuade more than data. Why personal testimony moves us more than abstract facts. Your brain evolved for story, not spreadsheet. Your ancestors sat around fires and created meaning through narrative. You sit in the glow of screens and do the same. The technology changed. The storytelling brain didn't. Part 8. Your inner narrator. Right now, as you listen to these words, there's a voice in your head. Not an auditory hallucination, but an internal narration, a stream of commentary, a running dialogue with yourself. This is your inner narrator, and it never stops talking. I understand this. This is interesting. I'm getting tired. I should remember this point. This inner voice is directly connected to the brain regions involved in language production. When you think in words, your speech areas activate slightly, as if you're speaking silently to yourself. You're literally talking to yourself constantly, and the conversation shapes everything. Psychologists call this self-talk, and research shows it has enormous power over emotion, behavior, and performance. The stories you tell yourself about yourself become self-fulfilling. If your inner narrator says, "I always mess this up," your brain anticipates failure, your body tenses, and you're more likely to mess up. The story creates the reality it describes. If your inner narrator says, "I'm learning, I can handle this," your brain remains open, your body stays regulated, and you perform better. Same situation, different story, different outcome. Athletes know this. Elite performers train their inner narrator deliberately. They practice self-talk that's encouraging, focused, instructive. Your inner narrator also constructs your identity, tells you who you are. I'm the kind of person who, I always, I never, I'm not good at. These are stories, not objective truths, but narratives you've constructed based on selective memories, social feedback, and countless repetitions. And these stories have power because your brain uses them as frameworks. Once you've decided, I'm not creative, your brain filters reality to confirm that story. The story becomes prison. But here's the liberating truth. If identity is story, you can rewrite it. Not through denial, but through recognizing that the current story isn't the only possible one. Therapy often involves helping people notice their inner narrator and question its narratives. Is this story true? Or is it just familiar? Is this helpful? Or is it holding you back? This isn't about toxic positivity. It's about recognizing that narrative is flexible. The same life can be narrated as tragedy or comedy, victim story or hero's journey. The events don't change. The story does. You can learn to notice the inner narrator, to observe its patterns, to introduce alternative narratives, to question automatic interpretations. Your inner narrator is powerful, but you're not helpless before it. You can become a co-author rather than just an audience, because the story you tell yourself about yourself shapes who you become. Conclusion: the eternal storyteller. So here we are. We've explored why your brain creates stories, how it constructs narrative from fragments, why memory and imagination are both storytelling functions. What does this mean for you? It means you're always living in story, always interpreting through narrative, always meaning-making through plot and character and theme. But awareness changes everything. When you recognize that your experience is always mediated by story, you gain flexibility. You're no longer trapped in one narrative. The story of your past isn't fixed. You can remember differently, emphasize different elements, extract different meanings. The story of your identity isn't permanent. It can be rewritten through action, through new experiences, through different interpretations. The story of your future isn't predetermined. Your brain narrates possible futures to help you prepare, but they're simulations, not prophecies. And the inner voice can become a collaborator rather than a dictator. You can notice its patterns, question its interpretations, introduce new perspectives. The brain will always tell stories, but you can become a more conscious storyteller. By recognizing that everything is story, you don't lose meaning, you gain freedom. The stories matter. They shape reality. But they're not the only stories possible. You are a story being told. You are a storyteller. You are the audience of your own narrative. And that story, however it's been up to now, is still being written. The words are fading now. And soon, your brain will move on to the next story, the next meaning, the next moment. But for now, just rest here. Let your inner narrator soften. Let the need to explain and interpret relax, just for a breath. There's nothing you need to understand right now. The storyteller can rest. And in this quiet space, perhaps you can feel what's beneath the stories. The simple presence. The awareness that exists before narration begins. It's always there, beneath the constant commentary. The stillness under the stream of thought. The stories will return. They always do. The narrator will wake up, will start interpreting, will create meaning. And that's perfectly fine. That's being human. But knowing that space exists, that quiet place beneath the narrative, that changes something. So let yourself rest there. For this breath, this moment, and when the narrator returns, when the storytelling begins again, you'll meet it with awareness. The brain will never stop creating narrative. But you can hold it all more lightly, can recognize the stories as stories, can choose which ones to believe. Thank you for journeying through these narratives together. May your inner voice be kind. May your stories serve you well. The narrative continues. Always. Sweet dreams, dear storyteller. If you found value in this exploration, please like and subscribe for more deep dives into consciousness, psychology, and the fascinating workings of the human mind. Recommended next videos. The Science of Memory, Why You Remember What You Remember, the Default Mode Network, Your Brain's Storytelling Engine, How to Change Your Inner Narrative, Practical Neuroscience. Leave a comment. What stories have you been telling yourself? Which ones are you ready to rewrite? Playlist, Deep Dives into Consciousness Support. Join our Patreon for extended versions and exclusive content. Thank you for being here. Until next time, keep listening to the stories, but remember the listener.